I guess I may as well go through this one. And the rationalist self, there is not going to be any Aristotle on test one. We'll have some on test two. But the diagram that I used to draw this on the board, the first thing I ever did here back in like 1994 was coordinate a telecourse. The lectures were not ones I did. They were actually done by somebody at, I think she was in at Dundalk, but it was a national PBS thing. But, you saw the videos on the Examine Life, and they're really well done and well produced. And, they interviewed a lot of the top people in the field. Well, these were much simpler. They were done probably in the 70s. And the telecourse was one where they would give people a checklist to see how well people were, how comfortable people were with technology, as it was in the mid-90s. Just simple things like if the videos are shown on PBS at 5 in the morning, you know how to set your VCR if you don't want to get up then, and stuff like that. But she went into a lot of detail on Plato, and as I say, those videos were very simple. They were kind of, let me go pause. They were just basically her lecturing. So, so now I put what I used to draw on the board over. But one of the things that I used to do was draw a human being with the head here, the midsection, pretty much from the chest to the head, and this from the stomach on down. I just put the words here rather than the graphic. But Plato actually looks at a human being or a soul as being integrated with parts of the body, and so he thinks that the form of a human being actually has three parts to it. That's why we call it the Tri-Partite self or soul. And roughly, Plato thinks these correspond to parts of the body. The rational part, obviously, toward the head and brain. The spirited part, and even today we speak of somebody as having a breast full of courage, which is kind of relates to the middle part. And the appetitive element, this is our lower nature for Plato. And basically, he thinks that different parts... Now, the thing that you need to see is that Plato thinks that every person has all of these three parts. But, and this gets in to ramifications for his political state, not everyone has them in the same degree. Now, Plato was much more modern in his attitude toward women than was Aristotle. And some of this came out. Aristotle thought, well, women have less reason than men. But for Plato, he thought that men and women in other words, that there were going to be people who excelled intellectually. And his view was that when people are rather young, kind of late elementary school age, there would be a program of what we today would call standardized testing, and that he would single out people for the ruling class out of this. And we're going to see that he thinks that those who rule a state should excel intellectually. But at any rate, he says it's this rational part of us that really desires knowledge and also goodness and the virtues. And now, one point about Freud, we know that Freud read Plato and was influenced by him, you know, and his ego, superego, and id. But the Freudian designations are a bit different than Plato. And I'm not real knowledgeable about Freudian psychology, but what I understand is, I mean, things like anger and aggression were looked upon like very negatively, and they're part of the id for Freud. But Plato thinks that there are places for aggressiveness and even anger, and for instance, if you're a member of the military class, that actually might be a good thing. And then the appetitive element. Well, we're going to see in Plato's view of an ideal state, and is it a democracy for him? Does it sound like it's a democracy? Not at all, is it? Because who does he want to rule?
Anyone has enough, because the wealth is in there, the military's in there, and then all the philosophers are there. So it's people that aren't in the lower class.
Well, you're getting in the right direction, but the military people might not be in the lowest class. But he actually, wants philosopher kings. He wants philosophers to rule. And in part, this relates back to Plato's theory of the forms. In other words, if there are non-relative standards for things like justice and moral virtue and goodness, well, you might say, well, if these are known by our reason rather than the senses, well, who is going to know better in society what justice is than people who excel intellectually, namely the philosophers or the philosopher. So he wants a ruling class, a ruling elite, but he does think that in this program of standardized testing, some women will qualify for the ruling class as well as men. And he wants to single these people out at an early age and basically separate them from their families and groom them to be members of the ruling elite. Now your book kind of has it be like a hippie commune where everybody's having sex with everybody else. Other people, basically what the lectures I used to cover, what she said was that Plato thought that this is a place where a state authorized lie was morally acceptable. And basically, and and this, we bristle at this today. Now I've got a friend who has been into horses for a long time, right? And if she's going to buy a new horse, one of the things that she'll do is research the horse's bloodline, And people knew, even back in Plato's time, that if you want a good racehorse, or if you want, you bred the best to the best. And this is what Plato thinks. He says, I'm going to breed the best of the ruling elite together. And so, the existing rulers will determine and will pair together the best with the best out of the intellectual people in this pool, the ruling class. But since they might bristle at the idea that their mate is being chosen for them, the state will lie to them and tell them that their mate is chosen by a fair lottery among, So you'll think, well, okay, this is the person who, the lottery determined, when really you've been paired up with somebody. You just haven't been told the truth about it. But so Plato is very controlling of the lives of the rulers. And he's also, for the military, it should be obvious that their lives are going to be very structured and controlled. But so the guardian class is the ruling class. These are the philosopher kings, and they're the guardians of the state. In other words, the state is under their keeping, so to speak. But then, and those are the people who excel intellectually. The people who naturally are aggressive. In other words, every human being has these three characteristics, but for Plato, some people in society, as we said, are dominated by one or the other. And so, and in our democratic society, we also bristle at this. Plato has almost a caste system going on here, whereas if you excel intellectually, you need to be in the ruling class. If you excel at the spirited element, the seat of our emotions, you need to be in the military or the police class. Now note, a Muammar Gaddafi or an Idi Amin or a Fidel Castro would be a bad thing for Plato, a military dictator, somebody who's both a military leader and a dictator, because, see, for Plato, if you excel at a certain level, you were meant to be in a certain class. And so it would be wrong for somebody who is meant to be in the military/police class to want to be members of the ruling class. Likewise, probably wrong for them to go and open a hamburger stand and open a business or be a carpenter if they were meant to be military or police. So these two top tiers, Plato really wants them to be singled out to live in almost like barracks situations, and their lives are very controlled. Now, Plato is a little more lenient with the members of the class who are dominated by what he calls the appetitive element. And here we're talking about the appetites for everything from the stomach down, right? Appetites for food, drink, but also sexual fulfillment. And so, you know, his idea, I mean, this is where we get the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. In other words, these people who are dominated by the appetitive element are very materialistically motivated. And they also, you know, they gravitate toward occupations, or should, in society, that have to do with fulfilling the needs. You know, either needs for shelter, you know, becoming a carpenter, even money needs. A banker would be in this class. And obviously, to be, you know, a baker or a butcher, you know. In other words, they gravitate toward occupations in society that fulfill, you know, people's needs. But Plato thinks if we have this, then we've got, you know, a functioning state where, you know, different needs are taken care of. And one of the things that your book points out, another name for the military class is the auxiliaries. And Plato's thought is that they should assist, you know, I mean, the hospital auxiliary is composed of volunteers who help, you know. And by the way, the absolute best hospital auxiliary sale is the one at GBMC, if you've never gone to it. You know, just look up Nearly New Sale, because it's coming up next month. You know, great place. But at any rate, the hospital auxiliary assists, you know, the hospital. Well, he thinks the rulers are supposed to be assisted by the military class to basically, you know, keep order amongst the common folk. But Plato is not that controlling of the lives of the people, you know. Now think about it. These are people dominated by their supposed lower natures. In a democracy, who do you get more of? People in this rational elite, or people down here? It's pretty obvious, right? You know, was it Lincoln who said God must have loved the common folk because he made so many of them? You know, I mean, it makes kind of the point. So, in other words, for Plato, he doesn't like the idea of a democracy, even though he's writing in Athens where, you know, democracy was effectively born, at least for the Western world. Because he thinks ruling a state should be a job for specialists. He wants a ruling elite, you know, what he calls the guardian class, the philosopher kings. Whereas in a democracy, you get, you know, the ordinary folk having a disproportionate say, from Plato's standpoint, in the way the state is run. And also, again, one of the reasons, you know, we all came from somewhere else, unless we're Native Americans. This thing keeps on some. I don't know why it's doing this. So sometimes the audio just seems to die. At any rate, you know, one of the great reasons why people came to this country is the fact that, you know, it's a meritocracy, essentially. I mean, you rise on your own initiative and merit in our society. whereas Plato, again, in other words, if you were meant to be in the artisan or the craftsperson class, it would be wrong for you to want to be a career soldier or a police officer. If you're meant to be in the police class, wrong for you to aspire to a career in politics. And so as I said, Plato doesn't have a view of the ideal state that defends this idea that opportunity should be there for anyone who wants it. Well, the characteristics of the soul, then, Socrates argues, again, that the soul has characteristics that resemble those of the gods. That it's intellectual, it's rational. They view their gods as rational. In fact, this was one reason why the Greeks portrayed their gods in human form. They said, we've never seen reason in anything other than human form. So if the gods are rational, they must be like us. They must look like us, And, the Greek gods are portrayed as the soul, we saw Socrates arguing that it's immortal, that it doesn't dissolve, but it's invisible and unchanging. And the soul is, and our intellectual part. See, for Plato, that is what should rule over the rest of our nature. But the body, resembles that which is mortal. It doesn't think by itself. Mortal, dissoluble. In other words, the body dissolves to death. Obviously visible and changeable. Part of Heraclitus, world. So, for Plato, the soul, the intellectual part of us being that part of us which is most like the gods, naturally, in the whole natural order of things, our intellect should rule over the rest of our self in order for us to be a really virtuous individual and keep the desires of our lower nature from getting out of hand, or keep us from getting too angry and aggressive, and basically, so he says the intellectual part of us should rule the other part, and especially our lower nature, the part that's most affected by the appetites of the body, the appetitive element, should be ruled over by reason for Plato. Well, now note that the forms for Plato are most like the divine. They're most like what is the forms we saw are known by reason, not by the senses. They don't, in other words, perfect beauty never dissolves. It's there eternally. Triangularity is there eternally, etc., right? But we saw that they're not accessible to the senses, so they're invisible and unchangeable. What triangularity is does not change. It was the same now as it was when I was in Poly. So, they're perfect and good, but earthly things then, dissoluble, visible, changeable, and they're imperfect and to some sense evil. For Plato, the material world has less of an existence than things in the world of the forms, and to fall short of existence. And it's the form of the good, his standard for moral perfection, that's the most, perfectly good thing for Plato. But it also is the most fully existing thing, and everything tries to approximate the form of the good, but falls short of it. So the thing is, to fall short of goodness is also to somehow fall short in existence. So as I think I made this point before, for us, existence is an all or nothing thing. For Plato, it's a matter of degree. And things in this world exist, but to a lesser degree than the forms. And so, to some extent, this material world for Plato falls short of the perfect things in the perfect realm of the forms. It's farther from goodness. And so, to a certain extent, this material world is evil, which is very different from the view you get, for instance, in the monotheism in Genesis, where God creates the world and pronounces it good. And so there have been real conflicts. Your book tries to show some parallels between, like Judeo-Christian monotheism, but there are a lot of differences. Well, anyway, to move on, we looked endlessly at some of these examples, but again, I separate the forms from particular existing things and give you examples in this slide, but we've gone over. Again, it's using our reasoning abilities, like Meno's slave boy, that gets us in touch with these eternal truths of the forms. And it's in rational discussion that we get closer to knowing, like, what a triangle really is, or what justice really is. So for Plato, and I told you the thing about Socrates' judgment, that we had to know perfect equality in order to judge that two things are equal but not perfectly equal. So he says we knew perfect equality, our soul knew it when it was absent the body. And so we're remembering what we learned. So note, the soul being very much like the forms, for Plato, longs to be with what is perfect and changeless and eternal. Longs for the realm of the forms. And another way that Plato, and you saw this in the video, talks about the parts of the soul is in a chariot illustration where there are two horses, one a very obedient horse, the other that's not very obedient at all, and it's the job of the charioteer and the other obedient horse to try to keep the unruly steed at bay. And so the rational element is represented by the charioteer, but then our emotional part and the part that's guided by our appetites, these are represented by the horses, and the spirited element is the noble horse, and the appetitive element is the ignoble horse. So notice, it's just like his picture of the military class assisting the ruling class. And so in an individual, Plato says our rational part should keep the other parts of our nature in check in order for us to be a really just, morally good person. In other words, here again, moderation in all things. How do we achieve moderation? By allowing our reason to moderate, like our desires for food and drink, and etc. To moderate our emotions, you know. And so in the chariot, you have the noble horse, which represents the military class, assisting the charioteer, who is represents the ruling class in keeping the other at bay. So the structure of a person then and the structure of a state, for Plato, one mirrors the other. And so our intellectual part should keep the other two parts of our nature in check. And so also the ruling class should keep the other classes of society at bay for Plato. So reason has to rule, and reason naturally should rule. So, you know, again, he says Socrates thinks, and Plato really thinks, that if we put in check the desires of our lower nature and seek the things that are above, there's more of a chance that in the afterlife we're going to be there with the forms and you know, with the perfect knowledge, and with people who also had like-minded you know, intentions. We join the gods in the invisible intellectual world, and other, you know, people who put their lower natures at bay. So again, reason should rule over the spirited element in order for us to be good, and moderate aggression and anger, and it rules over the appetitive element, the part having to do with our appetites, to moderate our desires for food, drink, and even sexual fulfillment. But no, Plato is arguing for moderation, not abstinence, not an ascetic life where you deny the needs of the body, like, you know, I guess a monk or something. He's arguing for moderation, not abstinence. So reason produces the virtues. We have courage when we can keep aggression. In other words, for Plato, even though aggression and anger were totally bad for Freud, for Plato there's a place for it. And it actually is a good thing for people in the military class. And temperance is the virtue produced when we allow our reason to moderate our desire. Temperance meaning self-control, you know, not going overboard. Now, justice here for Plato relates not to an individual part of us, but to the whole person or the whole state working together. So in a just state, political state, you've got all three classes working harmoniously together with the guardian class, those who excel intellectually, ruling. In a just person, you've got all three elements kept in a harmony with reason ruling. So for Plato, a just political state mirrors the structure of a just person. Now, of course, the problem with Plato's authoritarian politics is posed by the little question. In other words, unlike John Locke, who influenced the writers of our own Constitution to put checks and balances on the various branches of government, Plato doesn't have any checks and balances. And the question is, who guards the guardians? Who keeps the ruling class from getting out of hand? And Plato just has this, and Socrates both have this kind of naive view that to know the good is to do the good. In other words, if we're less than good, that's a failure of education. But if we know the right thing, we're going to automatically do it. But you know that's not the case. You know that's not, just knowledge of the right that doesn't guarantee that people are going to seek the right. But he thinks that who knows justice more than the members of the intellectual class, the guardian class, because they excel intellectually, and that's how you know the form of justice. So isn't it likely that they will rule a state most justly, because who knows more about what justice is? And if to know the good is to do the good, they're going to act justly. But in the real world, we know that isn't the case. Now, Plato's ideal state was never implemented. However, Plato's number one pupil, who never succeeded him at his own school and should have for political reasons, there was interdepartmental politics even 2,500 years ago. Aristotle should have succeeded Plato as the head of the academy, but there were differences. But at any rate, Plato did teach Aristotle, and Aristotle was tutor to who? Alexander the Great. So you do get something. So now see, here's a side benefit of doing philosophy. And believe it or not, this is one of those things where you can't make this kind of stuff up. It really is at the end of the Phaedo when they discuss, immortality. Plato says, if we seek to be the things that are good and right in the realm of the forms, our chariots are going to be pulled up towards the heavens. But if we don't, if reason fails to rule and we're taken over as persons by the desires of our lower nature or, anger, then our bodily desires pull our chariots back to earth. The unruly steed rules, and we're more concerned with things down here, with the things that the senses put us in touch with, rather than the knowledge and virtue and things that our reason puts us in touch with. And so one of the things he says is, it's these types of souls, the ones who in life let their lower natures get the best of them, who are wandering around graveyards as disembodied spirits. They can't leave the earth. They're just, stuck to the earth, So we didn't tell you the side benefit of philosophy is there's less of a chance that after this life you're going to end up, as a disembodied spirit, populating a graveyard somewhere. All right, we need to put that in the catalog. But we also don't want to mention that Socrates claims that really philosophy is just a practicing for death. Because in death, the soul longs to be with the forms, and by a reason in doing philosophy, we're trying to know the forms better. So, see, we might not get as many people signing up if we said that philosophy is a practicing for death. So, at any rate, okay, we'll see. We'll do some review next time, and I'm going to post a review sheet on the internet. As I said, my printer was having problems, and so I didn't print out as many. But I'm going to post that today. So at any rate, we'll see. Have a great weekend. We'll do some review Monday. Again, if you didn't get a copy of the test pool questions, come up and get one. And The take-home question, and there's only one that's required, just choose from the 7 that are there, is due Wednesday, the day of test 1. And the only thing we're going to actually do in class is the Scantron part, which for most